Captain, tell us about the Earth.
Do that, Captain, would you? Tell us about the Earth as you remember it.
I remember it as a place of color. I remember, Jojo, that in the autumn, Jojo? In the autumn, the leaves change, turn different colors. Red, orange, gold.
Today on our Twilight Zone Marathon of reviews, we'll be talking about On Thursday, We Leave for Home. This one is widely considered among the best of the fourth season. As some of you may recall, Season 4 of The Twilight Zone was unique. All 18 episodes had a longer running time. Sometimes that worked out, sometimes it didn't. In this case, the additional time actually did serve the story. On Thursday, We Leave for Home was episode 16 from Season 4. It was directed by Buzz Kulik, and it was written by Rod Serling. As always, spoilers are ahead.
This is William Benteen, who officiates on a disintegrating outpost in space. The people are a remnant society who left the Earth looking for a millennium. A place without war, without jeopardy, without fear. And what they found was a lonely, barren place whose only industry was survival. And this is what they've done for 3 decades, survive. 1 month ago, a signal from Earth announced that a ship would be coming to pick them up and take them home. In just a moment, we'll hear more of that ship. More of that home and what it takes out of mind and body to reach it. This is the Twilight Zone.
When our story opens, we meet the struggling citizens of a settlement on an unforgiving desert planet known as V9 Gamma. Life on this rock is nearly impossible. Resources are strained and there's never-ending daylight thanks to 2 suns that blaze down from above. The group's leader is Captain Benteen, as played exceptionally well by James Whitmore. Now, if you ask Twilight Zone fans about their favorite lead, the common names that will be mentioned are Burgess Meredith, Jack Klugman, Vera Miles, or William Shatner. But James Whitmore also gave a top-tier performance. In fact, I'd place him on my list of favorite classic Twilight Zone stars. Benteen was only a teenager when he arrived from Earth with everyone else. For 30 years, Benteen held everyone together as best as he could. He displays care for his people, he keeps them safe, and maintains order. Benteen has a firm hand and he relies heavily on faith. In a sense, these colonists are like his flock. Most notably, he instills hope in his people.
Folks, bear with it. 6 months' time, we'll all be drinking chocolate ice cream soda.
Unfortunately, the people on this outpost have grown increasingly weary, and some of the settlers have begun taking their own lives. Following the discovery of a young woman who has hung herself, tensions become even more heightened.
I say that dying was their right.
That's a blasphemy.
It's the truth. Isn't living tough enough here? We shouldn't have to go by the book.
After the memorial service, Benteen delivers one of his many sermons. But he's interrupted by a dangerous meteor shower which forces everyone into a nearby cave. Despite the fact that things seem to go from bad to worse, this scene in the cave is a highlight. This is where we see Whitmore really shine as Captain Benteen. He's asked by a frightened child to tell stories about home, and Benteen happily does so.
I remember streams of water that flowed down hillsides, and the water was sparkling and clear.
With his stories of home, Benteen is able to lift them from despair. And as it turns out, Benteen was right about rescue. 6 months after the transmission, a rescue mission finally arrives.
Our orders are to transport you all back to Earth.
Needless to say, it's a joyous moment. The rescue mission is led by Colonel Sloan, as played by Tim O'Connor. Sloan tells them they have 3 days to prepare for their trip home. At this point, the arrival of the rescue ship is a breath of fresh air. As is often the case, things rarely go according to plan, and this is also where the episode starts taking a darker turn. Things go sour between Benteen and Sloan. Basically, overnight, Benteen's people go from being completely under his rule to having a new guy in town who offers them everything they ever wanted on a silver platter. Benteen's people are quickly won over by Sloan's stories of modern Earth, and when Sloan suggests a game of baseball, they all jump right in, despite the extreme heat and warnings from Captain Benteen. Now, because the episode does an excellent job establishing Benteen as a leader, initially you feel bad watching his influence dwindle. He's clearly incapable of adjusting to the changes ahead. Unfortunately, Benteen gets even more unhinged as things play out. He lets Colonel Sloan know that he plans to petition the US government for a land grant so he and the colonists can remain together as a community. Obviously, Sloan is shocked by this notion and urges Benteen to discuss his plans with the settlers. Predictably, when Benteen does tell the settlers they have to remain with him once they arrive on Earth, things do not go as he'd hoped. The colonists have already made their own plans to settle in different states and do their own thing. With that, Benteen loses it. He accuses Sloan of turning his people against him by bringing selfishness into the community. He even goes as far as to label Earth a hellish pit of violence and despair, so he's basically trying to play on their fears at this point. Colonel Sloan admits to the settlers that yes, the Earth may not be a paradise. There are still wars, and unfortunately there's still prejudice. But at least on Earth, they'll be free. They'll be men and women. They won't be sheep. This is a magnificent and inspirational speech. And the reality is, Colonel Sloan is simply doing his job. He's offering these people a way home, which is exactly what they wanted for decades. With that, there's a vote. Remain on V9 under the thumb of Benteen or return home to Earth. Needless to say, everyone decides it's time to go home. Everyone except Captain Benteen, that is. But just when you thought Benteen couldn't go even more off the rails, he attacks the rescue ship with a pipe, and he has to be stopped by Sloan and his men.
Tomorrow you think you'll be getting on a ship on its way to paradise. Will you be on your way to hell?
Ultimately, Benteen says he'll remain behind, alone if he must. The next day, as the colonists board the rescue ship, Sloan searches for Benteen to offer him one last chance to return home with everyone. Benteen, however, hides in the cave. As the ship takes off, Benteen comes out of the shadows, and in a rather sad moment, he begins telling his typical stories of Earth. Except this time, there's no one around to listen. He soon realizes he's made a horrible mistake and runs outside screaming for the ship to come back and take him home. But it's too late. Thanks to his stubbornness, Benteen is now completely alone and stranded for the rest of his life.
William Benteen, who had prerogatives. He could lead, he could direct, dictate, judge, legislate. It became a habit, then a pattern, and finally a necessity. William Benteen, once a god, now a population of one.
Now, before we jump into the review portion, I just wanted to quickly spotlight James Whitmore, a fine actor with an impressive career. And he even had roles in prominent sci-fi classics such as Them from 1954, which featured Whitmore in pure badass mode, and Planet of the Apes from 1968. However, Whitmore is probably familiar to most of us from the movie The Shawshank Redemption, one of my all-time favorites.
Are you going to eat that?
Hadn't planned on it.
In the movie, Whitmore played Brooks Hatlin. The similarity between Brooks and Benteen is interesting. Brooks is an inmate who's been institutionalized. He's been in prison so long, he too struggles with the idea of returning to the outside world. Needless to say, when I saw Whitmore was in a classic episode of Twilight Zone, I was excited. And all the better because this is a top tier one. In fact, On Thursday We Leave for Home may be Rod Serling's finest writing in the series. There's more than enough here in terms of drama and characterization to keep us engaged. And like the best Twilight Zones, this is one that leaves us thinking. The story plays out perfectly, and there's no padding for the extended runtime. Actually, the added time allows for complete exploration of these characters and the bleak world they inhabit. It's also notable that the episode doesn't include any ironic Twilight Zone twist either. Colonel Sloan doesn't turn out to be a hostile alien in disguise, and the rescue ship doesn't explode in some sort of accident. Instead, the ship safely leaves and Benteen is left alone. As much as we love those infamous twist endings, sometimes the more grounded approach can be just as poignant. On Thursday We Leave for Home offers insight into a flawed but fascinating individual, Captain Benteen. He's a tragic figure with a brilliant arc. When we meet him on the surface, he's a stable guy and a solid leader. But as likable as Benteen is initially, it's hard to keep rooting for him as he continues to cross lines.
Let loose now, Captain. For everyone's sake, let loose!
And one of the more telling aspects is that Benteen refers to the settlers as children. He claims that without him to care for them, they can't survive. Now, I do wonder how much he may be projecting here because it's Benteen himself who behaves childish when his demands aren't met. I also have to credit Tim O'Connor. He knocked this one out of the park. Colonel Sloan was the perfect opposition for Benteen. Their conflict is central to this story. And Colonel Sloan is no villain. He's calm, cool, and collected. He's only doing his duty, which just so happens to conflict with the interests of Benteen. This is well-paced, complex writing, and it's a story that asks some hard questions. How far should loyalty extend to someone in a position of power? Sure, Benteen took care of these people for decades, but ultimately, he seemed to be seeking complete subservience, and that's something more along the lines of a dictator. By demanding everyone stay behind, Benteen placed his needs above everyone else. On that note, some may view this episode as an allegory for totalitarianism, which is a topic we've seen touched on in other Twilight Zone episodes. Others may see Benteen more as a symbol of an overbearing parent. Whatever the case may be, I can't help but feel if only Benteen had been more reasonable and open to change, he very likely could have made something of himself on Earth. Sadly, he was his own worst enemy. I also wanted to talk about the look of this episode. Visually speaking, there's a lot to like here. Everything from the rocky, otherworldly landscape to the battered and beaten outpost has a quality that fits this story perfectly. But in my view, the meteor shower sequence is a true standout. All things considered, these effects hold up pretty well. Now, in terms of trivia, there's some fun stuff here for fans of old school sci-fi as well. For instance, the cave that the colonists used as their meeting hall was previously used as the underground lair of the Morlocks from the 1960 movie The Time Machine. And speaking of reusing vintage sci-fi elements, well, I'll never get tired of seeing the famous ship from the Forbidden Planet show up in the fifth dimension. So, this is an easy one for me to recommend. Everything about this episode works. There's strong characters, a brilliant story, and it's executed flawlessly. I give On Thursday We Leave for Home 5 out of 5 stubborn Captain Bentines. If you've seen this episode and have your own thoughts on it, let me know in the comment section below. Also, special shout out to Grande's Graveyard. I was lucky enough to have a discussion with Grande recently about the entire 4th season of The Twilight Zone, and it was a blast. Stop by his channel when you can, check it out. He covers all things horror and does awesome live streams. Thanks for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this, please hit like, hit sub if you haven't already. It really helps the channel and I appreciate it. Until next time, stay safe, be well. Later.